So firstly, just to welcome everybody that has made the effort to line out this evening. It's very much appreciated, and I think it took us all by surprise when the tickets went on sale, or the tickets became available, that in less than a day and a half, the 100 spaces were booked up. And I think it was a great reminder to everybody that there are a lot of people with a strong appetite to have a conversation orientated towards breeders or breeding and young horse production, because it can be easy to forget that. I think sometimes, this is my fourth time coming to Wellington, and sometimes it can seem like that conversation isn't at the forefront of people's minds. But yet, when you go around from yard to yard, you see in the individual yards that appetite is there. There is that interest. And it's great that this has been a great test, or a great way to show that interest is there. So firstly, before we get started, aside from thanking you guys for such a great response, I just want to thank the Wellington International team. Have been super since this idea was floated to them. There have been quite a crew have lined out to make this possible and make this a success. And a big thank you must go to Lisa Lowry. So this started as a conversation and maybe a bit of a loose or a wild idea in terms of pulling this off. Myself and Dr. Erin Newkirk, who you'll hear from later, were having a chat about the possibility of doing something like this. We reached out to Lisa Lowry, who does a lot for the breeding community and the sport in general, and things move very fast after that, so it's very much appreciated, Lisa, and a big thank you again, once again, to the Wellington International team. And of course, events like this, it's one thing having the idea, but what makes these very possible is sponsors coming on board. And a big thank you to Keyflow Feeds USA for supporting this event and making it possible for us and all you guys. So I'd like to give Keyflow a round of applause before we start for coming on board. So the format, how it's going to work. So I'm joined on stage by Serio, the CEO of Keyflow Feeds USA. So I want to pick Kathy's brains for a few minutes while we have her. It's going to be followed by 3 live interviews. We're going to have Dr. Erin Newkirk, followed by Andrew Bourns, followed by Rodrigo Pessoa. After that interview, then we're going to invite all 3 back on stage. And hopefully, if I keep to my time management, which I'm not known for, but I will try my best, that we will have an opportunity then at the end in those 10 or 15 minutes where you guys get to ask a question. Now, I really would encourage that. I know sometimes it can be daunting to take a mic and ask a question in front of people, but what I always think is, if you have a question, there's a good chance that someone else in the room has that question as well. And there's no such thing as a stupid question or a simple question or a basic question. And I think in the industry, a lot of the times, we don't ask questions because we feel it's something we should already know. But you've done a disservice, to yourself, because you go away still not knowing it, and someone else is probably in the same situation. So I would encourage you to ask the questions. I think everybody is very open, and I'm sure when everybody started off in their respective careers, they were full of questions. So I really would, during that session, don't be afraid to get the mic. So, what I would like to get a little bit of insight, as I mentioned, Kathy is the CEO of Keyflow. What I would like to get is an insight into what a typical week as the CEO of Keyflow looks like, but you might also give us a little bit of background in terms of how long Keyflow have been on the market here in the USA, and a little bit of a brief overview on the company.
Can you all hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Kathy Serio. So Keyflow has been in the United States now for about 1.5 years. We formed the company October 2023. Although Keyflow UK has been in existence since 2012, and it was founded by Cam Price. Cam Price's brother is the #1 eventer in the world. And they succeeded in bringing to the marketplace a highly needed product. They sourced some outstanding ingredients for the feed, as well as having it be highly processed for the horse, which means it needed to be pre-digested. So all of our feeds are either extruded or micronized. So let me give you a little example of my week. It could be anywhere from, let's see, logistics, where I'm talking to customs, FDA, trying to get things through import through customs in Savannah or up in New York. I just also wanted to mention Tyler Weath and his wife Danielle are here. Danielle does our social media. Tyler is our East Coast sales director. He's been doing a remarkable job here in Wellington. So any day of the week can consist of me talking to any riders that we have sponsors. We do diets. We create diets for every horse individually in Bourns. So we are very hands-on, very customer-focused. We look to get the best performance, and that starts with nutrition. So not only are we working for Keyflow, we are also customers of Keyflow with our own horses. So that was the quick backstory.
And in terms of if there are individuals, yards, companies that want to reach out to you or want to pick your brains on something or are having a problem, what's the best way for them to go about that?
Actually, on our website, there is a Keyflow number, but it's forwarded to my personal cell. So you might get me, you might get Tyler, you might get Danielle. We're very easy to reach and approachable. All of us are also horsemen, and we all compete here as well. So I think you've probably seen me around. I've been in the animal health industry for over 30 years, first with Equine, then with High Gain, and now with Keyflow. So I kind of immersed my life is my lifestyle and my life and my job and my hobby is horses. So it's kind of nice not having to really work a day, they say, when you love what you do. And it's definitely a passion to make sure every horse's nutritional needs are met. So it's super easy to reach me. I have 1 million cards in my pocket. I can give them to all of you too.
And I'm always curious when you have any industry professionals, whether it's in a feed company or vets or anyone that's in and out of a lot of yards or dealing with a lot of people, what are the main challenges that you're seeing or the main concerns that customers or prospective customers typically come to you with? Or is there a reoccurring theme when you're in and out of a lot of the yards in terms of problems they're having?
You know, that's a good question because I like to preface every single barn call with what are your expectations? What are you looking for in a change in your feed program? Are you looking to simplify? Are you looking to get the best performance? Are you looking to tailor to every horse's individual needs? Are you looking to save money? So it's always a question of what is their goal. I find the most challenging are oftentimes barns that are investment horse barns that don't always feed the horse based on what the horse needs. They feed the horse to sell the horse. What I mean by that is, say, for example, they want a fat hunter, and that fat hunter does not need to be fat, does not need to be on a high-starch diet, and they don't see that. I think that they're setting that horse up maybe for failure, even though they look beautiful. It's not what the horse needed. It's what they needed to get the horse sold. Another struggle sometimes is elite athletes. They do need different feeds for different reasons. Say they are metabolic, insulin resistant, they have ulcers. You can't always feed those horses for energy. So changing their diets on what they need is really important. And then you can change it for the weekend. If you need more energy, you can add the energy just for the weekend, and then they'll go back to what the horse really needs on the Monday. So I think those are challenges that we face, is getting the diets right. But we are passionate about that part of it. That's my favorite part of the job. My team will send me diets still. I love doing that. We've even done diets down to the level where a horse needed far less calcium. If they were perhaps producing stones or something like that, we will look at everything that horse needs to make them better and make them perform.
And in general, is there an openness, if you strongly feel, if you're in a particular yard and you strongly feel that they're maybe not on the best program or not going in the right direction and you vocalize that, typically, do you find that there's an openness and an acceptance to that feedback?
That's a good question. I like to have a good time. So I mean, I joke around first with the person. I get their buy-in that you really do want to hear what I want to say about your horse. I have worked at the university level too, and looked at every horse at the university programs. And I usually say, "Are you sure you want me to give you the bird's eye view? Because I'm going to." And once they say yeah, and we joke around a bit, I can tell them what I really think of the horse, But if I don't have that acceptance or have the permission, I'm probably not going to get to the root of the problem, because I need their buy-in to let me tell them what my professional opinion, being in the business for quite a while, this is what this horse needs. And it's not always a nutritional element. With my position with Equine, it's also, you learn an ulcer horse, a laminitic horse, a metabolic horse. All these horses have issues that may not just be nutrition related, but forever they're going to be a horse that maybe doesn't get a steroid anymore because he's metabolic. So you need to use PRP, you need to use polyacrylamide. So I do give all of those different things to the customers when we're there. How do you feed sucralfate? How do you feed omeprazole? So it's not just about nutrition, it's about managing each horse individually.
And something that's easy to forget when you're dealing with someone in their professional or day job capacity is that the majority of the people in the industry are also living a second life and business outside of the industry in terms of their own horses and yards. And something, I think especially to us Irish when we first come to Wellington, or Europeans in general, something that takes our minds a while to get get our minds around it is the hunter world. Yep. Could you give me a little bit of insight into your involvement and your husband's involvement in the hunter world? And then I want to try and get a little bit of a snapshot into that, please.
I'm very glad you asked this, because we discussed this on Monday, and I said hunters, and it was like a 4-letter word. And he kind of glazed over at me and said, I don't want any of mine to be hunters. And I said, why? The market for the hunters is so strong. The industry is paid on the backs of the hunters. We provide a lot of the financial commitment to the horse show. Right now, I compete in the amateurs, the 3/5, 6 amateurs. My horse is by Arco 3. Arco right now, Arco 3 is second in leading sires and hunters and 20th in leading sires and jumpers. So a lot of what you see in the jumpers, just because a horse can't jump like 1.60 m and it jumps, 1.30 m pretty good, you're still going to make a lot of money breeding hunters. And it would be lovely to see, because we mentioned this, and I said there are 4 English disciplines in the United States. It's not just 3. We have hunters, jumpers, eventers, and dressage horses. It's time for hunters to not be cast-offs and hunters to be bred to be hunters. We're always doing thoroughbred cast-offs. We're always doing warm-blood cast-offs. Hunters are bringing a lot of money to the market. So I think it's really would behoove a lot of these big breeding barns to consider a hunter division. The international hunter futurities, as well, the green incentive futurities and the international derbies bring big money to the table. So I think it's a piece of a puzzle that can only add to your breeding program.
And I think to the room that we're speaking to, I think there'll be a much greater awareness or familiarity with the hunter world. But I'm really thinking of this in terms of the people that are going to be listening to the podcast version of this or watching the YouTube version of this. And I'm sure there are different classes and sections and different goals within the hunter world. And this might be a really basic or uneducated question, but when you're heading out to look for a hunter to produce in your system, what are the basics, or what's your dream hunter? What does it look like? What does it move like? What is it in its essence?
Moody Blues.
Say that again, sorry.
Moody Blues. It's my horse. We look for a beautiful horse, there's no question. A beautiful horse that has that daisy cutter movement, that doesn't have a lot of knee action, and then jumps in really spectacular form. I tend to kind of carry pace, and I think that the hunters are getting a little slow. In fact, I kind of get bored watching some of them that are slower. There are so many divisions. There's almost too many divisions right now. unfortunately, I tend to watch my division and then go. So I see the 3'6" divisions going more than anything. But there's also a very strong need for packers that can do the low end of the division, and they still bring big money. They're the best movers on the showgrounds. The 2'6" low adult hunters are phenomenal movers because everybody wants a ribbon, and that's the class they're going to win. So beauty, rideability, great movers, and great jumpers.
What do you think is the youngest that you can accurately identify a suitable hunter?
I have to buy all mine unbroke, so I do it from free jumping and watching them in an indoor. That's it. I can't afford a maid for the most part.
Do you say it down to an affordability or down to like what would be your preferred, or what's the earliest? Do you think at 3-year-olds you can identify what's going to make a good hunter?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've had maybe 2 that through the course of their lifetime, I brought them up through the ranks and they went through the high performance confirmations only to then go to the jumpers. They just weren't happy, you know? And I'm happy to do that. Pivot, change gears, be a jumper. I think it's when you try and make a horse a hunter where it goes south on you, you know? Once they stop growing and all that energy is going into something else, that's the horse you truly have, and it might not be a hunter. It might be just too hot, you know? It's going to take too much to get it quiet. Why do it? Make it a jumper.
So, thank you very much for joining me. And a big thank you once again to Keyflow Feeds USA for supporting this. And we will have Kathy back on stage at the end of the final interview. So for the moment, if I could have a round of applause for Kathy, and while we welcome Dr. Erin Newkirk. So, Erin is a very big part of why this has happened, as I alluded to at the beginning. We met for the first time on the Saturday of the 5-Star Grand Prix last year. And I think when Erin mentioned this, or maybe floated to see would I be open to doing something like this, I'm not sure that you had signed up to being our first speaker. So that's always the danger of making a suggestion, is that the person might have a suggestion in return. But it was very clear, while I'm sure public speaking isn't something that you seem to be rushing towards, it was very clear from the conversations with Erin that there was an incredible amount of expertise. And sometimes the people that you really want to try and draw that from are the people who don't want to be in the spotlight. But I'm really glad that you said yes, because I do think you have a wealth of knowledge. I think there's probably many people in the room that are already benefiting from that, but I expect there'll be many more people in the seasons ahead that will get the opportunity to benefit from it, especially now that you're here in front of them and that they can hear from you. We were chatting the other day about your path in veterinary and what led you to this point and to establish WellGrove Equine with your husband Michael. What I would like to know is what specifically drew you to pursuing the equine reproduction as opposed to focusing on all that was available to you as a vet?
Well, thank you for having me. Can y'all hear me okay? Because I tend to be pretty quiet. Excellent.
As long as you keep it close.
Yeah, close. So the passion for reproduction or breeding, I don't know, it's always kind of been in me even from a little girl. I mean, I remember growing up and seeing the magazines and seeing the ads for like Hilltop and Iron Spring and those horses in there and being like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, and looking at pedigrees and all that. And even before going to vet school, I had a mentor who's a vet, and she was a dog breeder. And I spent time with her in her practice and got to see how that all came together, and just the science, like collecting the dogs and looking at the semen under the microscope. And it just was always fascinating to me. And so when I went to vet school, I was like, I'm going to keep my options open. I did everything. I tried to be the best I could in all the divisions, but I kept getting drawn back to the repro. And the fascinating thing of being able to pull semen out of a tank that's frozen 20, 30 years ago and then have a baby on the ground the next year is just crazy to think about. But sometimes that is actually what helps us, is bringing some of those old genes back that we needed, that we got a little far away from. So it's just been a passion of mine for a long, long time. And I get to live it, which is the best part.
What's amazing is throughout the different events like this or the podcast, I ask a lot of questions. And every so often I'm quite taken back by an answer, because I never expected someone's path to equine reproduction to be from collecting semen from dogs, and that was what drew you in this direction. There seems to be there's 3 priorities in WellGrove: wellness, reproduction, and the quarantine facility. And we're probably going to dive in a lot more to reproduction and the quarantine facility. But how would you best describe the wellness aspect of your business?
The wellness aspect for me is looking at the whole horse. Reproduction is one of these things that horses don't thrive and do well unless the rest of the horse is managed well. And so part of my passion for that is making sure that you're starting with a good individual. And I like the young horses, the old horses, and everything in between. So as wellness, it sounds pretty basic, but it's vaccines, teeth, general condition. Are they getting the vitamins and minerals they need? A foot abscess here or something basic. But to be like the home vet for somebody and to help manage care, like some of the most rewarding things have been the horses that I've met when they were young and actually been at the end of their life too. I mean, it's been pretty passionate to do all that. And it's fun to bring babies into this world and do the breeding, but to build a relationship that's long-term is really fulfilling. So.
That's nice. What was a new experience to me as a breeder or horse owner was last year was the first time that I had ever experienced one of my horses coming out and having to do quarantine in the US and go through that whole process. Because a lot of the time, if you're especially in Ireland, they're maybe sold within Ireland or you're exporting them to Europe, and it's basic enough what you have to go through. But this was the first time that I had experienced one of my horses coming out to the US and going through that. And again, I'm thinking of the people that'll be watching or listening to this recording, but what could you explain in its essence, like what that quarantine process is or looks like when a horse, say, is exported from America to come out to the US?
So here in the US, we have a zero tolerance policy for contagious equine metritis, and that's the quarantine part that we offer the service for, is for CEM. And it's a bacteria. It lives within the genital flora of both mares and stallions that actually have it. It's endemic in Europe. It's not highly prevalent, but it is there. And so having a zero tolerance policy, the USDA requires a testing process. Because it's an extensive process, different states are allowed to handle this process differently. So the state of California, typically your horse goes in quarantine, you don't see your horse until it finishes, and then it's released. Well, here in Florida, because we have this in our backyard, and it's a huge industry for us, the state has decided to let facilities be able to do that testing, but also allow these horses to exercise, be kept fit, and keep going so that they're not coming out behind the 8 ball. So facilities that do CM quarantine do the testing procedures to test for it, but also typically allow your horse to still be accessible. The testing process for mares is about 15 to 18 days, and stallions are much longer, 35 to 38. And the thing that surprises most people is that when a stallion comes, that they have to, by the laws and the rules, they have to live cover 2 mares. And so that's very important for folks to know when you're bringing a stallion over. It's not collecting on a phantom. This is live cover 2 mares, and that is one of the things that we take super serious, is we know that these are athletes, that's their prime job in the world, and we have to get them through this as safely and efficiently as possible. So,
why in, say, 2025, for example, why is that element still a thing? Surely the risks are greater than collecting on a dummy.
So the short answer to that is that the testing process has not had enough validation done to prove that the alternate testing protocol of, say, PCR is better than the live cover scenario. So things with government and research and rules take much longer than the rest of us would prefer to do. But the work is being done. It's slow, but there could be a day where the live cover part does get removed, but as long as we can prove that there's another route that we can test that's as good or better. And the thing about this bacteria is it likes to hide, so it's not easy to detect on swabs. So if you get the wrong sample, it's going to be negative, but it could be there. It's similar to the bad word that we all fear, strangles. It's to really clear a horse for strangles, you got to be pretty aggressive on your testing protocols. So one day, I think we will have PCR as an option. The path's kind of starting to roll that way, but it's going to be a while. And with that, then maybe that'll go by the wayside.
Because I'd imagine if it's Andrew or Rodrigo and they've found their next superstar, which, it's a painful process trying to find the horse that's good enough to help them achieve their respective careers. And if it's probably a risk that, you're right, a lot of people won't think about, and I'm sure it's a risk that there's probably a lot of friction over when people do.
Yeah, it certainly can be, and that's why we take it so serious with my team, is that we know that this is not what you want to do, and it's trying to get them through the process as safe as possible. So they won't let you come through without doing it, so that's your only go.
What's nice on the quarantine side is when you're in a situation where, with your different hats on, they all benefit each other or complement each other, or one mix gives you a greater insight into another. It's a nice situation to be in. And I've been to WellGrove twice now, but in addition to owning and running a quarantine facility and being a reproduction vet, you're also a breeder. And what's really nice is I think you're genuinely excited about some of the horses that pass through, even if they're just coming from a quarantine perspective. And it's a great situation as a breeder because you're getting to spend a lot of time around these horses and get insights, because there are stallions that come through here that, we're all watching in the big classes, but you personally get to work with for that period. For those that you're allowed to get into, would you talk through some of maybe the higher profile stallions that you've had through, and some that stand out as favorites because of what they were like to work with rather than the careers that we know them for?
Yeah, that's one of the things when people, and we talk about horses, when they're at the facility, I get to live with them for 2 weeks with mares, and sometimes, these horses are transitioning. You get to learn a lot about temperament, behavior, their talents, and sometimes you may not see the best of them because of where they're at in their lifestyle, but it is really fascinating, and it's also fascinating to see certain trends happen where you're like, these horses by this sire or this dam sire are coming through, and you can learn a lot just by watching. I don't think I'm going to share any names. But I mean, over the years, I've gotten to work with so many cool horses, and it just, when I look back, I'm like, holy cow. And I've said this to you before, the one Phantom that we have at the farm, the first horse on it was Hickstead. So, I mean, you can't, he's not the most fabulous breeding stallion, but how cool is it to have that gold medal winner, be the first thing that shows up? And it's been a fascinating journey, and the insights that I get to see on these horses, it's really nice to be able to live with them because you get to know them. And it's, in all honesty, all of this is about horsemanship. And when you pick your stallions or you're trying to choose your mares, it's also marrying that together, not just, this looks great on paper, let's go. So.
And that's what's nice, even just getting brief glimpses into your breeding program, that some of the youngsters that you have are by stallions that you would have had to manage when they were passing through. So they obviously made, a positive impression. Yes. Yeah. You are a go-to person for a lot of the Wellington community on the reproduction side as well. And you're getting to see from the small breeder to with the one or two mares to the bigger breeders, and mares that are just solely breeding, sport mares that are doing embryo transfer or ICSI, what are the most common challenges, similar to what I was curious to know with Kathy, what are some of the most common challenges that you are seeing or encountering with mares that are brought to you, or what are the most common things that you have to try and help breeders overcome with their mares?
Well, the hardest thing is a lot of the mares we get to see down here are older sport mares. And some of them may have had a foal when they're younger, but a lot haven't. And nowadays, it's actually becoming a trend that less are having foals as young mares. And that really does affect them long term. So in a perfect world, as a reproduction person that focuses on this, a mare that could have had a foal at 3 or 4 actually sets them up for future success as being embryo or carrying their own when they're older, as well as being able to do the OPU ICSI process, because after they've carried a foal, it makes those ovaries easier to access for the process. And so you have, things get stretched out in a good way. And it's the biggest thing is maintaining your mare's fertility or trying to preserve it, because most of them come to us when they're aged. And so you're already, set yourself back a couple steps. The embryo transfer, that acceptance in that has helped a lot, because we can do that when those mares are a little bit younger. But sometimes they're busy in sport and that's their priority. So I tend to tell people, if you get a break or you get a moment or you got a reason to layer up for a little bit, keep it in mind. And if you have a really good mare, it's really nice on the U.S. side of things here to keep those genetics here. Because the thing that makes me the saddest is when I go see a mare and she's retiring from sport and she's 15 and she's getting ready to export. And we never got access to those genes on this side of the pond. But the mare was here for many, many years. And so it's like, darn,
With that, when you're saying that you're increasing your chances or you're helping the situation by, say, covering them when they're younger, is it covering to carry or just breeding with them?
It's cover to carry. So the thing about a mare's reproductive health, it has to do with her cervix. And carrying a foal takes that cervix all the way from normal size to passing a baby out. And that stretching is actually very therapeutic and good for her health long term. Also, by carrying the foal, the ligaments and everything that are inside get stretchier. And so when you try and do OPU and ICSI, you can pull that ovary and it's not as uncomfortable for the mare. It makes it easier to obtain your oocytes, but it also makes it a more, I think it can be done humanely, but can be more humane to the mare because she's already more flexible inside. So.
Because as a breeder, that is one of the things, or if you have a sports stable and you're just after maybe buying some exciting 3-year-old, and even if you have an interest in breeding, it can be a little bit more daunting and you're thinking about all the what ifs. But it's interesting to get that insight. What I was surprised at in a conversation we had earlier in the year is I would have assumed that for a lot of the sport mares that are here, that it would be predominantly embryo transfer that people were availing of. But you gave me the impression that there was actually a lot were more orientated towards ICSI or OPU. Can you give a brief insight, because sometimes we'll throw around terms, whether it's ET or ICSI. Can you give me just a brief insight into how embryo transfer and ICSI differ, and then what part of the process you're offering at WellGrove?
So embryo transfer is a process where you breed the donor mare herself as if to carry, and then you flush an embryo about a week later. And then that embryo is packaged and transferred into a recipient mare. So it's the closest thing we can get to natural breeding without that mare carrying her own foal. OPU stands for ovum pickup. It also gets called TVA here in the States, or transvaginal aspiration. So you'll see those words or terms used interchangeably. And then ICSI is actually the process of injecting the sperm into the egg. So the ICSI process is done in the lab, and it's intracytoplasmic sperm injection is what it stands for. But basically, that's the lab procedure. The OPU or TVA is what's done and can be done remotely, and then the oocytes shipped to the lab. So what we can do here is be able to harvest those oocytes and then send them to a lab that somebody wants to use for the actual ICSI process. That, because we're intervening, we're taking out immature oocytes, we're asking them to be developed in a lab, that's definitely more, it's not normal, but it works. And it allows for some of the things for, it was originally developed for infertility. So mares that couldn't produce a foal any other way, or stallions that had limited semen or poor quality semen. That's where it started, and that's where it's used in humans mostly, is to overcome those issues. It's gotten probably a little trendy in one way, but it also is just, it's still just a tool, and it's how you choose to use it that makes the difference. So some people find it less intrusive into the mare's schedule, some people don't, to be able to do it, but because it's a little bit more invasive and uses a needle, there are some risks with it. So you can't take it lightly, but you definitely, for a lot of people, it is an option on the table, and to be able to do it well is one of the things that people, you know, humane for the mare, have sympathy for. Make sure you're not asking too much if you're going to do the OPU route. And
You mean from a sporting perspective?
from a sport perspective, absolutely, because, you know, I tell people that some of these mares, the next day after procedure, they're like ready to go, rearing to go, because I see them and we watch them. And some of them, you know, they take a little while to kind of come back to themselves. So every mare's different on that, and you got to give her grace if you're going to do that kind of procedure. But it has allowed some people to obtain embryos that they could not in any other way. I have one of these mares in my own personal herd. She has a almost incurable fungal uterine infection, and I've tried treating it. I could probably spend thousands of dollars trying to treat it. But if I do OPU on her maybe once or twice a year, we can get foals from her. And it's an easy option, because now we're bypassing that problem, and I don't have to put her through that multiple courses of treatment, multiple lavages, antifungals and sort of things. So I can actually do less discomforting things to her to get an embryo out of her. But you got to take it within reason. Trying to be as natural as possible really should be the goal, but you have tools at your disposal, so you can choose what works best for your situation.
Because that's, for a while, especially in Ireland or in Europe, I was getting the impression that if people were going the sport route with the mares, they seemed to be leaning more towards embryo transfer, a feeling that it was less invasive. But that's why it was interesting when we were talking recently that you have a lot of clients that feel the other way is actually less invasive. Now, whether that's less invasive to the mare or less invasive to their sport program, that's the thing.
That is probably part of it, is it's less disruptive time-wise for some of these mares in their lifespan or their career than trying to track, chase, breed a cycle, flush, and possibly do it again, and the timeline that takes. I'm not trying to oversell it, but it is definitely something that some people have found beneficial in that way. So.
And I suppose similarly with what I was discussing with Kathy in terms of advice or guidance, like if you have someone that comes to breed a mare, say breed a sport mare, will you advise one or the other, or is it down to customer preference?
It's a little bit of it all. You got to look at what the mare in front of you is doing. There's been multiple mares I've looked at that they want to do OPU, and every time I look at her, I'm like, she's ready to breed. Can we just breed her, please, and flush an embryo? I'll get you there faster, because they don't have a good number of follicles. So the OPU is a numbers game to do the ICSI. If you don't have enough follicles there, don't put the mare through the procedure. That's really the short end of it. And then some mares just don't cycle well or whatnot, and so you might play it the other way. But it also depends on stallion preference. There's some stallions, there's not enough or there's not quality semen to even consider trying to breed to flush an embryo. You're climbing an uphill battle. But if you have a good aged mare and great semen, I'd rather do ET first, traditional embryo transfer, because you have a more vigorous, healthier embryo that's natural selection's kind of already done for you a little bit. But you know, it depends. There's so many factors, and it's not like you don't walk into the situation and say, this is what I gotta have. You walk in and see what's given to you, like what the mare's trying to do and tell you, and what the factors that you're working with are.
I know, obviously, with both processes, you're still ending up back in the situation where you have an embryo, hopefully, that you're putting back in a recipient mare. In terms of your choice and preference on a recipient mare, in the ideal world, obviously sometimes if it's a fresh transfer, your options are probably reduced, but in the ideal world, what does your perfect recipient mare look like?
Had a foal, less than 10, good mother. You want a good uterus, obviously, but that is the ideal. The not so ideal is a mare that's either not had a foal and is older. So, you know, she's in her teens and they're like, she can't do anything else, let's make her a recip. And the uterus ages with or without you. And so, you know, you're still putting it in an aged mare at that point and, you know, passing the embryo through the cervix. It's a bit of a challenge for that mare's uterus. She's got to be able to receive it and also stay healthy. And so you want, when we make these embryos, they're actually quite expensive. You don't want to drop it into a bad option because you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So young, healthy mares are the best. And a maiden could definitely be considered for sure, but the younger they are, the better, in all honesty.
And that's what I was going to ask when you said has had a foal. Why has had a foal versus a maiden?
For all of us repro people, the cervix is the most important part of this process, and having had a foal allows that cervix to have gone through what I described before where it delivers a baby, and so it actually has done everything it needs to do. It also lets you eliminate those mares that might not be good mothers. So not every mare wants a foal. Most do very well, but sometimes you get the ones that it's not for them, and the last thing you want to do is have that be your recip mare.
As I mentioned at the beginning, in addition to being a vet, you are also a breeder, both dressage and show jumping. What for you do you feel that the industry here, particularly in the US, could do, implement, improve to give kind of greater recognition and support of American breeders and American bred horses? Because it's, while there have been several people have really tried to push that forward in terms of improving different aspects of it, and some in the room, including Lisa Laurie at the back, I think has put a lot of effort into this regard. It still feels like the industry here is a long way off, and obviously I'm coming from a situation where it's probably the other, where we're a very maybe breeder-centric country. As a breeder, what do you think the industry could be doing more to recognize and support US breeders of any discipline and US bred horses? Like, are there things that you feel are like there's low-hanging fruit there?
I wish I had a good answer for that, because that is one of the things that would be so nice to know. The people that carry the flag, that when their horse is showing and competing and they're like US bred, which is nice because then you recognize it. All of us that have breeding farms that we put our letters on there, that actually means something to a lot of people. And some horses, as they name change, lose that. And so it kind of gets lost in the mix. I don't have great ideas on how to fix that, but it would be nice because there really are some good horses produced here and that people just don't realize. So it's one of those things. For me as a vet, and this probably doesn't have anything to do with like the world out there, but every time I scan a chip on a horse, the first 3 digits are the country code. And I'd love to see the 840, which is the US code, to show up on horses one day, because I know when I get a 528, it's Dutch, 276, it's German. But, you know, even those chips were used here in the US for some of those breed registries initially. Now they've moved away from that, but we're still using the universal 900 numbers. And so you can't even tell by scanning where it's coming from. But because we've moved away from branding these horses, you can't see from the outside. But that is one of the markers that would be interesting.
And something that you mentioned in one of our recent conversations as well about, like, there's lots of people in the room. We have people in the room who breed a lot. We probably have people in the room who breed one mare. And sometimes, and this isn't just a US thing, often when you're a breeder of one or two, it's very easy to kind of talk down what you're doing because it's like, I'm only a small breeder. But if you actually look at a lot of the success around the world, a lot of the good horses come from small breeders. And I think there's probably a greater level of time and attention and care that you can put in when you have smaller numbers. But it was a point you brought up recently that I probably hadn't thought about in a while, but it was just important to acknowledge it, to not maybe always looking. You can look to the bigger breeders for inspiration, but to not be disheartened because you have a fraction of the foals that they might have. We're towards the end. Whenever I'm interviewing people, I love to get advice for the people that come behind in a given profession. I'm going to go two ways with it with you. One is probably to make your future breeding season easier in terms of what advice can you give to the room or to breeders and how they can kind of give themselves the best chance for the year ahead. But then I'd also like to give your career advice for the aspiring vet or maybe a recently graduated vet that's going to pursue a similar career.
So for breeders, potential clients, anybody that wants to do this, plan ahead. Get your foot in the door, start the conversation going. The hardest time is when April 1st comes around and everybody's like, I'm leaving town at the end of the month. I need you to make me a baby. That's a very uphill climb. I've done it more times than I probably should. And I've had even shortest time weeks as 2 weeks to try and get something done. But it's much easier if you plan ahead or at least plant the seed that that's the plan. So that's that part. For veterinarians and career, if you're interested in being a vet, if you're in vet school, just there's not that many of us still in equine vet world. There's definitely a lot more small animal, but it's a bit of a, we wish there were more. We really do, because that's also what helps our lifestyle. That's one of the greatest things that why vets don't tend to pursue equine is there's a lifestyle challenge with it. And God forbid if you want to have a family. Huge shout out to my husband for making this work. But it can be done, and you can get creative, and you can find ways to make it work. And if you're just passionate about doing what you want to do, it'll come along.
And judging by the number of people that were in and out and checking on different things when I was at your place the last day, I think it's also good that it looks like you've built quite a solid team as well, a support team and structure at WellGrove.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't do it without them. It's a dream, it's a plan. I'm living, what I love, and they are amazing. They really are.
Can you please put your hands together for Dr. Erin Sellers Newkirk? At this point, I'd like to welcome my fellow Irishman to the stage. Can we have a round of applause for Andrew Bourns, please? Originally, I had convinced both Andrew and his father, Richard, to join us, and Andrew's father, Richard, got tied up with business in Europe, but we have a very capable man flying the flag for the business and country beside me here. So thank you very much for joining us.
Hello.
Okay. Yeah. I'd like to take it back. While obviously you're from Ireland, you're from not too far away from me in the west of Ireland, this has been your home, the focus of your life and business. And while you're based here and your father is running the program at home, I'd first like to just take you back to how did you find yourself coming from the west of Ireland to being based in the US, being based in Wellington? What did that path look like for you, or what was the moment or moments that made that happen for you?
Well, there was many reasons. My mother and father used to like to come here on holidays. So every year they would come here for 2 weeks just to catch the nice weather. And actually, when I was a teenager, I won a training bursary to ride with Missy Clark here. I won it in the RDS. And that was a huge moment for me because it uncovered this whole new world. And look, we all knew it existed, but I never knew quite the expanse of this show. So came here, rode for 2 weeks, and I was still in school. It was never my intention to come back. Finished business school, went to Waterford IT, and I finished school there. Went to Germany, and one morning we had to get in and feed the horses at 5:30 in the morning, and the doors of the barn had frozen shut. There was an ice storm that night, and we're running back to the house to get a kettle of boiling water to open the frozen doors in Hamburg. And I remember calling my dad later that day, and I said, look, I really want to ride horses for a career, but there has to be an easier way to do this. I don't think I can put up with this. And he said, well, let's try Florida. I started here with a wonderful lady named Lillian Stransky. We already had a pre-existing business producing horses in Ireland. So I brought 4 horses here the first year. And Lily gave me stalls, a place to live, and a job training her daughter, all in the first year. And the exchange was I would bring a horse that could jump the big classes and possibly sell it. And even better, she bought 2 of those horses that I brought. So in essence, I went home that summer, and now I got a better grasp of what was needed here and what sold well and what the market needed here. And over the next couple of years, between working for people and coordinating with my mom, Deirdre, and my dad, Richard, at home, producing horses and then importing them here, we were able to dial in what the market really required, and at the same time promote my own sport as well. Because at the end of the day, my competition career was important to the business, and the business was important to the competition career. I always knew I couldn't have one without the other, or at least one would suffer without the other. So we were able to keep an eye on both as well.
From when you, after your 2 weeks, when you came back out the second time, and you went home for the summer, then what were the main learnings? I know you're saying it gave you an insight into what was needed, but what were those main learnings that, or the greatest learnings that you went home with?
I'd say, look, we're always learning. That's my main insight to anybody in this industry. It's an industry and a sport that's constantly changing and evolving. So if you ever think that you've figured it out or you've got it all, you're completely wrong. And you're standing still and you'll get overtaken. What I learned the first year was the type of horse that worked here was not necessarily the same kind of horse we liked in Europe. So what I was able to identify was a niche type of horse that was maybe a little less competitive, a little easier to ride, and maybe something that people in Europe would even get bored with. Actually worked quite well here in the lower end of the market. And then this is where I started, was selling horses to jump meter 20, meter 30. It was quite lucrative, and I could sell a lot of horses over the year. And what was interesting to me, because at that point I was working on a limited budget, was I could buy horses 10, 11 years old in Europe. Say the wife of a professional show jumper had this lovely mare that only ever jumped meter 30s. They would get very bored with that horse. And suddenly I realized there was an entire market here that had a huge demand for it. And I realized that there was a good business to start importing those. Now, that's a segue from our family business, which was always buying young horses or breeding young horses and producing them up to be world-class show jumpers. But for me to get a start, to actually get a foothold in this market, it was really interesting to learn that initially. And then I learned a lot about competing at a high level here as well.
And something that we'll get into shortly is that very successful young horse production system that your family established and still run very successfully in Ireland. But based on those experiences and learnings, were there changes or adjustments that were made quite quickly to how you did things at home, or was that something that kind of evolved over time?
I would say yes, there was much more of an emphasis at home put on how the horses were trained, how they rode. No longer was it good enough just to go to a show and knock some results out of the horses. There's a lot of riders and professionals in Europe that are extremely good at getting on a green horse or a horse that's not entirely produced and going into the ring, and we all know them, and they can get a result where nobody else can. What I realized that was a little short-sighted for the American market, because when they came here and people tried them or wanted to live with them, and also when you sold them, a lot of times the success was short-lived and they ran into issues. Or you ran into issues just trying to market the horse or sell the horse here. So I changed my focus very much towards producing horses that were nice to live with, producing horses that were easy to ride and nice to ride, so that by the time they came here, or by the time they settled in here, they were easier to market. Because we find that if the horses arrive here and they still need a lot of education and production, it's a lot more expensive to do it here. So it's cheaper for us to educate the horse and produce the horse up to a very high level of training and rideability and almost pleasure for the customer to ride, so by the time it gets here it can sell easier and faster.
For anyone in the room or that's going to be watching the recording and that might be less familiar with the system and home at Lisbeg in Galway, could you give an overview of what that system looks like, maybe the sort of numbers are involved, and how that system works to fuel or fund the business both at home and act as a supply chain for you and your career as well?
And that's a good word. Primarily the system at home is a supply chain for my business here. And we try to focus on a very steady supply. So we like to have a nice spread of 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and then 8-year-olds horses in production, competing and putting up a good record and being produced properly. To give you more details, we have a dairy farm in the west of Ireland. It has very good soil quality, very temperate climate. It's a very easy environment to keep horses in, and it's a very good environment for horses to grow up in. We would have anywhere from 12 to 20 horses in work at all times. And the horses competing at shows would range from 4 years old up to 7 or 8 years old at that facility. And we've anywhere from 2 to 3 riders. It changes on how many horses we have riding full-time there. And then my dad is all the time sourcing horses as well in Europe. I'd love to say we breed them all, but we don't. I'd love to say there's a certain age that we buy the horse that works best for us, but I'd say that in our experience, there's no real magic number that we always buy them as a 3-year-old or we always buy them as a 4-year-old and produce them. The reality is we are always looking for a nice horse, and if it is a nice 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, we like the type, we like its temperament, and we like how it goes, we buy it. And if it's a nice 8-year-old and we like its temperament, we like how it goes, we buy it, as long as we can afford it at that point, because they can be a little pricey. We're right now, and I discussed this with my father today, we're really trying to get a grasp on whether it is better value for money for us to produce the horses from a young age or go out and actually source them. And it's very difficult for us to put our finger on it, because it's expensive to educate horses. It's expensive to bring horses to horse shows. We do it to an extremely high standard, so we run expenses pretty high. So a lot of times we're left with the question, well, do we buy an 8-year-old or do we buy a 5-year-old? And the reality is we very much just keep looking for horses that we think we like and that will suit this market and do very well in the sport. And for as long as we are capable, we will buy that horse, whatever age it is.
From the clients that you have or have had, do you find that there is an added value, though, in a lot of the horses that you have, that you've either sold well or sold to high-profile stables, or the horses that you've had throughout your career? While you were mentioning about the type of horse that you were buying for resale, the impressive thing about the system has been that a lot of the horses that have really been your flagship horses, either as sales horses or your business, you've had from foals or from 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds, and you did the whole production system. While I know sometimes it feels like you're saving yourself hardship by maybe buying a 7-year-old rather than starting a 3-year-old, do you find that there has actually been a huge value in being the ones that manage that whole process? And then do you think your prospective customers appreciate that in terms of reducing the unknowns?
I would say yes, absolutely. 3 weeks ago, I jumped the 5-star classes here, and I was very successful that week. I was placed in the qualifier, good round in the Grand Prix. Both horses that I rode, we bought as foals. My mum and dad bought as foals. I would say, as regards the very, very top end of our performance horses, we have had them from a very young age. And I've said this before, and I'll live by it. At our farm and in our family, we love the horses and we love the process. And I really do believe that those horses benefit from being in the same system and the same high-quality system from when they're a foal all the way to when they're competing in that arena in a 5-star competition. There's a lot to be said for being part of the process the whole way. Mainly because we do everything with the horse first. So there's no corners cut in the production of our horses. So a lot of times when you buy older horses, they may have had a worm burden when they were younger. They may have had an injury when they were younger. They may have been competed too much at a high level where they were not ready for. And sometimes either that mistake or that issue hasn't been identified until we've owned the horse for a couple of weeks or a few months. And a lot of times we're playing catch up to make up for somebody else's mistake. What we have found is, yes, if we can have the horse in our system the whole way through and we produce them to the standard and to the level that we really believe they deserve, and we try to do everything to the highest standard we possibly can, the end product is a horse that we absolutely can stand behind. We know everything about. We know his soundness. We know his history. We know any small injuries that he's had before, which they all do have injuries at some point in their career. And we end up with a horse that is really, really very reliable and very desirable by a lot of people.
So what's great is one thing that's come out of this is you can ring Richard after this event and say, we have the answer. We need to keep buying them young. We need to keep buying foals, supporting the breeders, and buying the young horses. So, yeah, that's one good thing. In terms of like potential challenges, and when you're regularly on the lookout, Richard's regularly on the move, there's not too many young horse classes that I'll turn up at Ireland where Richard isn't by the ringside, and there's usually a chat, you know, what's the horse, where is it at? He has a good handle on what's happening. So you're seeing a lot of horses, you're probably inquiring about a lot of horses and probably trying a good few. Again, back to, I'm always curious with whoever I'm speaking to, the common challenges, like what are the main challenges that you're finding? Even when when you ask after a horse, there's already been a filtering process because there could have been 50 horses in the class and you might be asking after 1 or 2. So you've already got down to what you like. But are there common things that you're seeing that the horses are kind of falling down on or falling short of your expectations when you go to the next stage to try to buy?
Well, I should really start the answer to this with essentially what we look for and what we prioritize when we're looking for horses. And we might be a little bit different to some people, but we absolutely prioritize their brain and their attitude first. So essentially what we want is a good work attitude and a good work ethic from the horse. If the horse is intelligent and is willing to be trained and willing to accept my guidance and my rider's guidance, my work rider's guidance as we go along through the process, their chances of success are much higher. But if we start off with a horse that's a little resentful and doesn't really share that work ethic that we need, that can be troublesome. And a lot of times, just from looking at a horse or just from watching the horse go in the ring, you can't really tell that.
Can or can't?
You cannot.
Oh, yeah.
You cannot. There's certain things you can look out for, but and you can look at their technique and you can look at their carefulness and their blood and all that. That is all very important too. But for us, we really prioritize their attitude and we prioritize their ethic. And you really don't know that until you live with them for a little while. And so that's probably one of the biggest perils for us, is that sometimes the horses turn out to be just not quite the same as what we thought they would be. Having said that, another one of the challenges is a lot of the horses we're looking after, especially as they get older, there's an emotional attachment there too. So the people a lot of times need some convincing that they want to sell the horse. And it can be a slow burn process. So a lot of times my dad will see a horse belonging to you or somebody in Ireland, and they could watch it compete for 6 months. And it's something both my parents were always very good at. Every time they meet an owner of a nice horse at a show, they go up and talk to them. They have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and they give them the time of day and build a relationship with a lot of those breeders and a lot of those producers in Ireland. And a lot of times putting pressure on the owners to say, you must sell it now, I have buyers coming, it's not productive. But what we will say is, when you're ready, when you feel the horse is ready, we would like to be your first call. And I think we put a lot of work over the last 20 years into building relationships with breeders and with producers in Ireland and all over Europe, France, Germany, Holland, Belgium, to be that phone call so that when you want to sell your prospect, your superstar, well, I know the Bourns family will do a good job and I know they'll treat me well. And I think we've worked very hard to be that person and to culture that amongst a lot of the breeders in Europe. And that has helped us, but that's not something that came easy. It is a lot of work, it's a lot of time and a lot of effort in it. And so always remember, and I say this to if I have a training client and we're trying to find a horse for them, we generally want to buy the horse that people don't want to sell. So we have to be very correct and very efficient at the same time.
When you see either yourself or your dad, Richard, and you might see a video or he's at a show and he sees a superstar and he inquires, you're mentioning obviously the attitude is a priority, but what are some of the showstoppers? What are some of the things that if you see that or hear that or get an inkling into that's there, you walk away? What will you not accept for your system or your business?
Okay, the dead ends. I think for us, and if you really look at our business, one of our main issues is soundness. Hereditary unsoundness, certain sires that we know breed hereditary issues in their soundness, and also a lot of people are competing and riding horses and the horses are really not sound enough. And most of the time what we want to do when we buy a horse is put them in a system where their training is accelerated and the demands on their body is accelerated because we're going to push them to another level. And even in their training, like my training can be more intense than somebody who's been training the horse in the west of Ireland. If we think that their soundness and their conformation can be a large part of that as well, starts with the feet, straightness, balance in their conformation. If we think that there's going to be an issue there and we think that the soundness is ever going to be a problem, I would say that is probably our number one no-go area and showstopper. Then after that, there's a couple of traits. I like to look in their eye. It's not for everybody, but I feel if a horse has a good, genuine eye, it's usually a good place to start. And then in modern sport, and for the level of horse that we tend to sell mostly, they need to be quality and they need to be blood. So we don't always look for this perfect technique, but they have to be light. They have to move along the ground with lightness. They have to move effortlessly, and they have to have that blood. They have to have that go in them, because the sport is evolving to a point that I think quality, speed, and blood are becoming more and more of a demand. I think long gone is the sport of this huge scope and these slow-moving giant jumpers that take twice as long to get around a course of fences. I think what we will start to look for more is this blood and this potential speed and this potential quality in the horses.
You've enjoyed a lot of good days with Team Ireland, and represented Ireland on numerous occasions and Nations Cup and a European Championship with CTAP Blue, is it?
Nations Cup final.
Sorry. Looking through your list of references over the years, while, as I mentioned, it's impressive that you have taken some of these horses that you've brought to that level through from buying them as a 6-month-old foal. But equally as impressive is the list of horses that you have sold that have had successful Grand Prix careers with other riders. And I'm sure there's mixed feelings. You have to fund the business, but then when you're seeing them having such success around the world, or even on your back door here with other riders, from the references, are there one or two horses that, if money was no object, you would have loved to keep for your own career that stand out? I know there's a lengthy list, but is there one or two that you often think of that you'd love to still have to give things a proper crack?
I'd say there was more than one or two. It's something I've always prided myself, and we've always prided ourselves in that when we sell a horse, they tend to do better for the next rider. And as we say, we like to leave a little bit in the horse for the next person. I think it's a reflection on our system. Also, not to sound bashful, but I like to ride in a system that is easier to replicate. It's a very standard go-to system that a lot of people can follow. So at no point when I sell a horse am I trying to say to a person, well, you know what, you really need to keep your hand down at this point. You really need to keep your leg back at this point. I like to condition all my horses and train my horses to go in a riding system and a style that is easy for the next person to replicate. Not every horse is going to be easy to ride, but I will say I like to train them in a way that is easy to replicate and easy to follow. You talk about horses, the one that got away, or I could say I have a number of horses in my career, and I would say selling them was the best decision I ever made, and it was the worst decision I ever made at the same time. If I look at my business and financially, yes, it was for sure the right thing to do. But then in my career, a lot of times, especially when I was younger, I had to step back. I now had a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds to ride once that horse was gone. So my world ranking is shot. I did not have 3 other meter 50 horses or an owner that had a stable more full of horses to just give me another one. I didn't have that infrastructure at the time. So one of the better ones, Round Thorn Matias, is 12 years ago. 13 years ago now. Absolutely fabulous horse. I competed, I was placed in the Grand Prix in Dublin, 4th. I competed Nations Cups all over Europe. And at one point the decision came, do I pursue a riding career and really go for championships and team riding, or do I sell him for a sizable amount of money? And I chose to sell him that one. And as a result, I was able to buy a farm here in Wellington. And that started a whole other career and business that has actually grown to be quite lucrative and successful for me as well. So I'm extremely happy I did that. Having said that, I will always regret not seeing where it could go. So this time around, I have C-Top Blue. I made a very difficult decision against some advice from a lot of people to pursue my competition career. I was in a different position in my own career that I could afford to do that to some extent. I had enough support, I had built up enough infrastructure, I felt, that I had enough other horses coming through that I could sell them and would still run that business and still run a very fine business, and also compete him up as far as I could go. And I think right now I'm enjoying the fruits of that. I have a wonderful 5-star horse. I have a good reputation as a 5-star rider. And I certainly believe that the two go together. The competing at a high level helps me sell horses. Selling horses helps me compete at a high level. And it's not for everyone, but it's certainly working for me.
Obviously, you have many, many, many years left in the green jacket. What are your future ambitions? What are the priorities for you to tick off the list throughout the remainder of your career?
I would like to compete at the Olympic Games and at the World Championships. And personally also, I would like to produce a number of horses that do so for other riders as well. And I strongly believe that in me aiming for such a high pinnacle level in the sport, it's motivating me every day to ride better and to be better for my horses, run a better system for my horses, and produce all of my horses to a higher standard. And I really do think the spin-off from that is that now I have, for sure, a number of horses competing at an international level, and by constantly honing in my skills and trying to be better all the time, I'm now doing a better job of producing those horses. So not only competing at that high level, at the championship level and at Olympic level myself personally, but also producing a horse that somebody else, that a number of other riders can also ride at that level. I think that's a goal for me as well.
And I know, being based in Wellington, you are a safe distance away from any potential breeding of the past or present at home. I'd like to get your advice, if you have any, for the breeding community or breeding world. I'd love to hear that. Whether you're actively breeding yourself or not, it doesn't matter. You still have a perspective, and yourself and your dad are still regularly in touch with a lot of breeders. So if you have a perspective in terms of how you would advise breeders, I'd love to hear that. And then similarly, I'd love to hear your advice for the young riders coming through behind you.
Well, I'll start with the breeders. I really believe that in our industry and in our sport, breeders play a pivotal part. And you mentioned it earlier, some of the smaller breeders, they tend to undersell themselves. And I think it's a huge mistake. I think from your 1 or 2 mare breeding farm all the way up to your 2,000 mare breeding farm, all the breeders are very important. I think what they should strive to do is breed the best horse possible. Don't be breeding horses just for the sake of breeding horses. I mean, select the best mares you can find, and if you get the opportunity, if you're open to opportunities out there from people like me and a lot of other big operations Some of these mares can get injured. Some of these mares, their careers are over show jumping a lot of times earlier than they should be. And for us, there can be really good value found in actually buying some of those mares, because they're not worth much to us to compete anymore. And there's a huge value in them to start breeding from, because they generally have fantastic bloodlines. And realistically, starting with good dam lines is the best way to get into breeding. And I don't want to say it's easier than you might think, but I really do believe that if you're open to the possibility and you really do your groundwork and you really make connections and you really talk to people, it is more achievable than a lot of people think to find those nice mares. And then look after the nice mares. I find that the mares are the pivotal part. We tend to talk about stallions in show jumping breeding mostly because they're easier to categorize. So for every one good breeding stallion, could be 500 or 200 good breeding mares. We're not going to talk about all of those. But it's easy to talk about the Canans and the Choco Blues of the world because there's not many of them, and it's very easy to categorize them. And I think from that, a lot of people maybe get misinformed or get the wrong idea that they're the pivotal or the most important part. And you might agree, in the end, I believe the mare, starting off with a good, solid mare dam line is the most important part when you're breeding. And it is more achievable than maybe some people think to find those nice mares, to acquire those nice mares. And then you find the best stallion possible. You work with people like Lisa and her team, and they will find you very, very good stallions. And you could someday, for less money than it might seem on the outset, breed a world champion. It could happen. But I don't think you should sell yourself short. I think you should aim for the top. You should look for the best mares you can find, and then try and find the best and most suitable stallions you can find. And don't be afraid to ask people like me or Rodrigo or McLean, what sire do you like? I have a mare, she's by this. Who do you think I should cross her with? Ask around. People are a lot more keen and excited to talk about it than you might initially think. So I think that's my main advice to breeders. It is achievable, it is possible. Aim for the best and really try hard, and you can do it. And then for young riders who want to achieve a high level, I could say something cliche like work hard and stick to it and get gritty and all that, and too many other people say that. I think you need to remember why you're doing it. We do it because we love the horses. We do it because we love what we're doing. And in the end of the day, you have to love the process more than the destination, because a lot of times you're going to have one rail down, your horse is going to stop, you're going to miss a class because the horse is not sound enough. You're going to have a lot more hard days in this sport than good days. So you need to learn to love the process. You've got to learn to love working on the basics with that horse. You've got to learn to love being around the horse every day. Enjoy what you're doing with the horse and enjoy the little progression every single day. If you get 1% better every day with your horse, after 100 days you'll be twice as good. And if you remember that, I think this sport is a lot more achievable, and it's a lot easier to handle the hard days because there's a lot of them. And yeah, just remember why you're doing it, and we're doing it because we love horses and we love what we're doing. And enjoy the journey more than anything else.
Super, that's a nice note to finish on. Could I please have a round of applause for Andrew Bourns? When you're trying to do events like this, capture knowledge, and back to Andrew's piece about people being more approachable and accessible or more open to giving feedback and helping you, I think the fact that this man is sitting beside me for an event like this is the perfect picture of what Andrew was saying. Could we have a round of applause for my next guest, Rodrigo Pessoa? There are probably not many, there's a lot of well-known names in the horse world, but Pessoa takes it to a different level. And I am very grateful that you give up your time to participate in this. I know you're a man that is solely focused on the top levels of the sport. And sometimes when I talk to riders, and initially when you want to have a breeding conversation, maybe sometimes they say, well, I'm not involved, or it's not something that I do, or it's not something that I know about, or it's not something that I'm interested in. But the value in getting the insights from riders is so crucial to us as breeders. And whether it's in formats like this where you guys have given up your evening to come and listen to this, or if it's the next time you're at the show, I'd just love if you had that extra bit of motivation to go up and corner Andrew or corner Rodrigo. Not just these guys, I don't want 100 people cornering them every time they go to a show, but to just take that step, because I couldn't agree more with the way that Andrew finished that, and I have found that myself. I can't believe the openness that successful breeders have or riders have to actually have a conversation with you if you pick your moments right. What Rodrigo has achieved in his career has been remarkable. We talk about ambitions and to go to an Olympics one day, and there's some young riders in the room that I'm sure have that. For a person to get and take the opportunities to go to 8 Olympic Games is really quite remarkable. When you went to the 92 Olympic Games, I believe you were the youngest person competing at the Games. Remarkable enough that was it, but you were also competing at the same Games as your father, who was the oldest show jumper at the same Games, and to have done 8 since. I think you're on 3 Olympic medals, a gold and two team bronze, which it's remarkable. And you became a world champion at 25. Was it the youngest world champion at the time?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. It's amazing when someone can have achieved and won so much that those details are not.
It's been a minute now.
It's been a minute. Obviously, you were born into a very successful show jumping family, as I mentioned, and to have a father like Nelson Pessoa, who is such an icon in the sport. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the children of show jumpers are going to pursue a career in the same industry. Sometimes they go the other way and they don't want to have anything to do with show jumping. But it seemed very clear to you, even though it didn't sound like you were pushed into it, it seemed very clear to you that this was something you wanted to do. Do you remember your earliest memories where you decided this was all that you wanted to do and you wanted to make a career in show jumping?
Yeah, so a lot of the things that you said are correct. I was never pushed to do it. Despite from my young age, horses were the talk at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because my dad that was his business, that was his profession, that was his passion. So we talked, about horses. So from a young age, that's all I heard. But I was never pushed to do it. We had ponies in the backyard of our house, and the ponies were there, and if I wanted to ride, I could ride, and if I didn't want to ride, as a young kid, I did other sports. I did judo, I did tennis, I played soccer, and only when I started, I was 9, 10, I started competing on ponies, and that really got me. The competition really got me. And then shortly after, I went to the World Championships in 1986. I was 13 years old. And I saw around Nick Skelton on Japaloo in the Final Four, the horse change. And it's something, it's on YouTube and you can look at it. You can just put Nick Skelton, Japaloo, that round's gonna come up. And it was just the most incredible thing that I had seen. I know a lot of competitions. I used to go to shows with my dad and I knew all the riders and I knew that it was a great sport, but that round just took it for me to another level. And that day I said, everything else for me is over. All the sports that I'm doing are over. It's riding. This is what I want to do. This is the career that I want to do. And from that day, then the push of my father was much stronger then. I said, okay, we're going to do this. And so I was very young when I identified that I wanted to do this. So I was not a great student in school because my thing was like the horses. I was just like obsessed with it, and to compete and to learn how to do it. And so yeah, I was obviously lucky to be born with a setup that was already there, that was already established, that was successful. It's a huge luck and a huge leg up, but it's also a big pressure to have to come in a family. No other family members ride. It was just my dad, but he was so successful that the beginning it was definitely hard. It was definitely difficult, but it also forms you as a person, as a young man, your character. When I can remember being at pony shows and I was 12 and 13 and 14, and you're warming up and there's all these people that are there watching, and when you're going to the ring, you look back and all those people are following you to go and watch. Oh, let's see what the son of Nelson is doing. Is he, as good as his dad or whatever? He's only 12, but let's see. That's a lot of pressure for a kid. So, but in another way, it's what forms you. If it's hard, it doesn't matter. It's good. And I was mature earlier, and that pressure, build up as a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old. It was always more. But when I started my international career, I was 16 years old and started jumping Grand Prix, as a 17-year-old, which is the earliest that you can jump from the FEI rules. I'm not going to say that I was ready, but I was, a step further than any other 17-year-old that would potentially do it, because I had gone through that grind machine of the public eye and the public opinion. And I can remember also other events that happened to me of like hearing comments from people, they don't especially recognize you, and comments from them, harsh comments from people would say, oh, he didn't do well. How can he not do well because he's the son of Nelson Pessoa? Or so all of that, it just helps to build your character, build the strength to be able to endure pressure as the years go by. So I can't remember. I went a little bit off topic here. I can't remember exactly your question, but in 2 words, I was very lucky to be born in a privileged situation, to be able to do what I then decided to do my career, but it came also with difficulties that were not small.
Either from your family or from maybe mentors beyond your family, was the mental side of things something that was discussed and worked on? Because that is an incredible amount of pressure, and I've had this conversation with a friend not so long ago about the pressure that children in the horse world are under, whether it's put under themselves or the family or because it's a family business, but the pressure that I think in not many other walks of life, there's same level of pressure in a sporting or business capacity. Was Was the mental side something that was discussed at home or worked on at a young age to make sure that you could cope with that?
No, honestly, for me, it was not discussed. It's just part of the job. The people are there. The people are watching. The people are criticizing. That's part of the job. That's the way it is, and you have to just deal with it. Some people deal with it in a better way, and some people deal with it in a harder way. For me, I dealt it, by myself, just trying to like solve the problems, and now there's a lot of like.
Sports psychology?
Yeah, sports psychologists and everything. I think it does help, definitely. But then the person has it in them to solve the problem or not. Of course, now in modern days, there's a lot of this, it's important because this is a mental game. If you can't handle it mentally, you can't do everything that you have to do on a course of 60, 65 seconds or 38 seconds in a jump off. There's so many things that go through your head. And there's so many things that before you even get to this place have to happen, that you need to be like strong mentally to deal with it. So for me, it was not discussed about it. The experience that you get, the negative experience or the positive experience, everything is an experience. Whether it's good or bad, you learn. And you learn much more from your mistakes. And like Andrew said, we have many more bad days than good days. So you just learn from that, learn the process, what brought you there, and how you can, solve the problems, how you can get better. And so I think that a lot of the work has to be done by the own person. Somebody else telling you, yeah, do this and do that. Everybody is different, and some people, might need that. I never really was the type that needed it because I was exposed to it from an early age at a very high level and a high density. So that's up to everybody to find what is good for them and what works for them. That's the most important. But the pressure that parents put on kids nowadays, it's insane. It's not sound, it's not good. Those kids will not make it to the higher level. Of course you have to push, and of course you have to be demanding, but you cannot, you see it here, the little kids that are jumping on the ponies, and it's like, it's just too much, and these kids will go away because they will not be, unless you have a really thick skin, they'll stick through it and go and maybe make it, but you have to push, you have to hold the kids accountable and stuff like that, but all within a certain limit that the kid can handle, that it doesn't become a negative and, turn the kids off. And, I think that's very important, and you see it a lot. And in Europe, you see it with the jumper ponies. They don't have hunters or anything, but they do the jumper ponies, and jumper ponies are worth crazy amount of money, and they have these huge trucks, and the trucks are big, and the ponies are worth fortunes, and all of that, it just puts a lot of pressure on the kids, and it's hard for them to come on the other side.
Yeah, it's that people are running a business, but they also have to remember that they're a parent.
Yeah, I think that the first and foremost as a parent I think in my opinion, is the education of your kid, is the happiness of your kid. It's to keep them in a good headspace, and to do this sport, if they choose to do this, I think it's great, the contact with the animal, and learn so many things and respect the animal, and there are so many positives about it. But it cannot become about, only beating your fellow competitor, and there's so much more to it. But I think it's a great school of life for, the disappointments, and not give a reward just because, a disappointed reward. Disappointment is a disappointment. You have to take it on the chin, whether you're 12, 15, or 25 or whatever. this is a sport, and you have failed, you have to go back, practice, come back, and it's all that process that is very important. And I think that it gets a little bit lost because there's so much at stake, even in the small rings, you know, in the pony ring, there's so much at stake. There's so much like frenzy over the whole thing that why they really do it, it gets lost a little bit, in my opinion.
As well as having some good mentors from a young age, you had some incredible horses that really started your international career in such a positive way. And I thought what was nice about this evening, and actually you stood up at the perfect time, Timmy Brennan, one of the most successful horses in your early careers, and a horse that you did a lot for you and you did a lot together, was Special Envoy. And it's nice that Timmy, that's at the back of the room there, who had a very successful win in the Under-25 Grand Prix, that it was actually bred by his family. And now I believe you're doing a little bit of work together at the moment. I'd love to touch on some of those horses from past, present, and future within the time constraints that I have. But while we have the two of you in the room, could you talk to me a little bit about what made Special Envoy such an incredible horse for you?
Well, he came to us, he was 8 years old, he was by King of Diamonds. He was purchased in Ireland by Max Howry, that used to purchase all his horses in Ireland back in the day, in the 80s, 70s and 80s. He bought everything in Ireland. And so we got him through his sister, which was our owner at the time, Heidi Howry. She used to ride Jessica, also an Irish mare. And the horse came to us at the end of his 8-year-old year, and my dad rode him first. He was his main quality was his character. The character was unbelievable, and he was always ready for anything. He was careful. He didn't have the scope that, maybe you would have thought was needed, but he had the heart, and that took him to the other side. And when I got to ride him, he was just 10. In 1990 was when I started with him. He was my teacher, and he was a teacher at a high level because we went to the World Championships that year. He would just forgive my mistakes, but when I did everything right, he would give me like incredible results. And it's a horse that won a lot because the faster he went, the better he went, and the more scope he gained. And so it's a horse that won a lot. I could have won more, but I was young and I was too eager and making mistakes. But he always forgave me, and he never held
A grudge?
Yeah, he never held a grudge. It was always okay. So he was a horse with a huge heart and a great character. He would be a horse that today he would be still competitive at the highest level on the courses of today. And he would be actually very good today because he was a very fast horse and careful. And like Andrew said, the horses of today are not anymore those big scopy horses that were used back in the day. They're light, quick, and most of them, if you see them jump 1.35 m, 40, 45, you're like, oof, maybe that's it. And they're jumping, 1.60 m back and forth. It's just that the character, the heart that they have just takes them to the other side.
One of the most iconic partnerships that many people will really know you for throughout your career is the partnership with Ballabé. And not just to go to the Olympics, but the triple of back-to-back World Cup wins is, to win one World Cup is a challenge, but to do 3 back-to-back. I would imagine he taught you a lot, but in a different way than Special Envoy taught you. Could you give a little bit of a feel for what, in terms of maybe a challenging way, but in terms of the positives that came from that, from having to manage a horse like him, how did it change you, or what did it teach you with that partnership?
Yeah, that horse obviously taught me a lot, but like you said, a lot of the hard things I learned with him. He came to us as a 5-year-old. He had a lot of scope. He had the potential. My dad was the one that rode him the first day when he arrived. And after the first jump, he said, this horse is going to be great. One jump. But he was like a wild boy. So it took a lot of work with him as a 5, as a 6, as a 7-year-old. My father rode him a lot. My father was competing him in young horses class. He had just had a heart attack, so he was not riding very much or at all. And he would just took that horse as his project, together with our assistant, Jos Kumps. And they spent like a lot of hours on him because he was very difficult to like channel his energy. We could see that he had all the attributes that you were looking for in a horse, but you had to channel his energy. And obviously, being a stallion, you were always very close to the line of the quality of the line was very close with him, of being a little bit of a coward because he had so much quality, but the line of cowardness and being so respectful was very close. So that's why, there were some incidents along the way. But again, from those incidents, you learn. For example, I learned much more from, the 3 refusals in Sydney than from the gold medal in Athens. Because when something goes wrong, you dive much deeper into the research of what went wrong. And when you go, well, okay, it went well, it was great, and you watch the video and you don't really look with the same perspective, but when it went bad or it didn't go as good as you wanted, then you really go deep into the research of why. And those episodes with him, they were very important for my career, and it makes, like Andrew said, like the bad days, make the good days even better. And with him, it was the case. And I mean, you learn with every horse every day. And again, he said it just before, you can never think that you know everything with a horse, because the next day or the next moment, some horse will throw you a curveball, and because you've been into this for a long time, you've seen a lot of these curveballs come, and you can deal with it, but there's always something new and always something to humble you back down to, to trying to solve the problems. Horses are fascinating in that way.
Do you think because you experienced him in such a remarkable way, both the difficulties, but then the benefits of persisting with those difficulties, has it made you a lot more patient and tolerant with horses now versus if you didn't have that experience? Would there be the risk of overlooking horses now because it's just too difficult, don't have the time? But you reap the rewards of the persistence with him.
No, definitely you reap the rewards because, like I said, the potential was there. You had to channel that potential, that energy, in order to achieve like great things. So you had to go through all that process in order to get there. And in that process you learn a lot. But I think that with any horse, that is going to teach you something, it just goes into your power bank. Everything that happens is just there, and you save it And one day you have a horse that, oh, geez, I remember that horse. I used that bit because that's what I felt. And you try that bit and it works. So all of these things are just, it's like a big wheel that you're on, you know, and it keeps, it keeps turning. But events that are negative or not as great really give you a huge possibility, you know, to learn more and gather more experience. And when you then see a horse, you can judge a little bit quicker, you know, yeah, this is something that I could deal with or something that I can't really do. When I try a horse, for example, that's what that's why I try to imagine, I try to feel what the horse is doing and what the difficulties that I will have, you know, to put him to the way that I want him to go. And then I try to remember, have I had a horse, you know, that has been similar to this, and how did I solve this problem? Like, that's my thought when I try a horse. By the way, I only try a horse only once. I never, ever tried a horse twice. Because my opinion is that I need to love the horse, or I need to like the horse that moment. And if I'm gonna try him again, I know people like to try the horse a second time, I will pick him apart so much that I will never buy anything. So I don't like to do it for myself. And I like to try it. I don't want to jump too big, but I want to see, you know, what do I have? How could I, you know, is this a horse that could fit my system? And I try to buy the best horse that I can. But I don't like to try the horses. You know, people are sometimes surprised. You're coming again tomorrow? I said, no, I'm done. I haven't jumped too big, and I'm done. Because I know that the next day I will go right to the problem that I felt and pick it apart, and that will be a turn-off. But I will accept the challenge. Buying a horse that is challenging is not a problem, but I need to, you know, think that I can solve that problem.
The trade-off has to be worth it.
Yeah.
From Olympics and championships and Pan Ams and Nations Cups, like the list of horses and results that you have and successes is quite long. Can you look back throughout the greatest horses throughout your career and see common themes that the great horses had that makes them different, like from the good to the great? What's that extra little bit that those really special horses, the horses that made it, that were good enough to get your championship horses, or the horses that you could really rely on time after time, what differentiated them from the good horses?
Mindset of the horse. That's what makes the great horse different from the normal horse or the good horse. What's makes a great horse is the mindset, is how much they want to do it. Because people nowadays are like, oh, the horses, you know, why they're forced to do this and they don't like to do this, but that's not true. The great horses, you see, they are like, they live for it. They're buzzing when, you know, the lights are on and the stadium is packed, and these horses, some shrink and then some grow. And the mindset of the horse is everything. And that's something that is not easy to identify when you're going to try a young horse, for example. You're going to try a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old. It's not easy to identify that mindset, but you have to try to capture it somehow, because it's there. It's not something that you can train. It's not something that you can teach. It's something that is there from the start. So for me, I think that when you're trying a horse, no matter what age, I'm trying to look for that, you know, that mindset of how he's gonna, you know, correct from a mistake if he makes one. That's how, you know, you try to pick the best horse that you can. But I think that is the differentiator between a great horse and a superstar.
looking to the future with the horses, if any foals that we're going to have this year, or any mares that are going to be covered this year and are foaling next year, it's 10 years on before they're going to be at the top of the sport. What are the attributes that are the most important things that we should be thinking of? And Andrew touched on some of the aspects, but like for you, in 10 years' time, for example, or 10 or 15 years' time, what's your picture of the sport looking like in terms of the horsepower that's required for the highest levels?
Well, first I think that we have to, ask the breeders to please continue breeding. Yeah, continue breeding, continue, like the passion. Breeding is a passion, is a very costly passion, because you could breed like one horse in your backyard, and if you wanted to go to the highest level, you can hang on to it as much as you can financially, but it's a very long time. There's a lot of hardships that come with it. So the job of the breeders is, in this picture of the high performance, is super important, and sometimes, a lot of times I would say, is very much like forgotten about. That horse was born somewhere by the thought of a person that put this mare and the stallion together, and today it's a 10-year-old superstar that is jumping. So I think that we have to thank the breeders, because first of all, it's a passion. Breeders that are doing this like to make money or whatever, this is not going to work. This is not a good investment. So the passion of the breeders is just incredible, and there's two types of them. There's like the ones that have one or two mares and that do their thing every year, and there's the one that do the masses, that do the 500, 1,000. Zangers had only bred one superstar in maybe 1 million horses. One superstar was Ratina, one, in 40 years, 50 years. So it is not easy. It's a very, very difficult job. It's a crapshoot. When you put a mare and a stallion together, it's a crapshoot. And then the road, like you said, is so long until it's here and performing well. There's so many things that have to go right in order for the horse to make it to the big level. It's a very long road, but the breeders are at the start of that road. And if there's no breeders, there is no road. There's no final if it doesn't start there. So that's the first thing. And then I think that the breeding nowadays has become so much more thoughtful, and with the purpose of breeding the ultimate star, of the thought that goes in choosing the mare and what is the best talent for that mare. All of that has become so professional nowadays. It's quite incredible. It doesn't make it any easier. It doesn't make it any easier, otherwise it would be just too easy. Take this mare, take this stallion, do like 10 of them, but it doesn't work like that, because thank God it doesn't work like that. It's not an exact science, otherwise it would be just boring. But I think that the importance of always believing that one day you're going to have the horse that's going to do it all is just... I'm not a breeder. I've bred a couple of horses, a hobby. It's not really my area of expertise, absolutely not. My expertise is something else, but I don't have that...
Madness?
I don't know if it's madness, but it's a kind of a calculated madness, but it is so important. And thank God we have a lot of mad breeders, if you want to call them that. But it's what makes the sport turn, because these horses were started somewhere. So I think that the breeding nowadays is getting, like I said, so professional, and there's more and more horses that come out. Good horses, great horses, superstar horses. But there's still a lack of them, because there's so much so many people that are ready to buy any horse at any price that there's not enough of them. So it's difficult.
What I'm thinking is if we roll on another 10 years, at which point you'll have 10 Olympic Games under your belt, what does your horse look like now, or do you see what are the demands that you expect to need for the top level sport at that point is I suppose is what I'm trying to drill down to a little bit, if you have a feeling on the direction of where things are going.
I mean, this might not be a popular opinion, but I'm kind of worried with how things are going, you know, at the moment with the sport, especially in Europe. There's a lot of, you know, all this activism about horses that is not good for them to do this, and all these rules that, you know, you can't do this with a horse, you can't do that, you can't clip their ears, you can't clip their, you know, their whiskers because it's bad for them. These are people that have no idea what they're talking about. Absolutely no idea. And it's kind of worrying a little bit. If you say like 10 years, it's a long time. It's around the corner, but it's also a long time. And I'm a little bit like nervous about the next 10 years. But anyways, that's a side note. But I think that sporting wise, I don't see how we're not going to jump bigger fences. They're at the maximum. They're not going to be wider. We can't go much faster because the jump-offs are going like so fast now. I don't see that there's a huge evolution possible in what we're doing today. I think we're going as fast and jumping as big as we can with the horses. You know, so I really think that if we continue on what we're doing now, the breeding is the right thing. Because I don't know what we are going to require more from the horses to do the big level. I don't know if that makes any sense. To me, I don't think that we could go faster. Everything is light, the color, all the thoughts that are put into the course building today by some course builders that really test the horses with good questions and fair questions. I think that they do a great job. So I don't know that it can really evolve so much more.
And just lastly, before I invite your fellow guests back on stage, and hopefully people can stick around for another little while for some questions with the four previous speakers. Similar question to what I asked Andrew is, with your depth of experience and in your various roles, like as well as a rider, you're also the FEI Athletes representative as well, which brings in a whole different aspect to what you have to do and represent. But what advice would you offer to the young riders who are trying to make this their life and career?
I mean, the world has changed dramatically from when I was learning the ropes of this business, of this industry. It has changed, the world has changed so much. And I learned a lot by obviously listening to the people that were teaching me, but I also learned a lot by watching. My dad always said, watch, just watch. Watch what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. You watch and try to identify what they're doing right and doing wrong, and you learn a lot by watching. And I feel that today, the youth of today doesn't watch. They don't care. They're on their phones. That's all they're doing. They're not watching at the warm-up Scott Brash or pick any rider that you want. You know how they're warming up their horses, sitting through a class and watching the whole class. You know, and today I watched the WEF, for example. I watched 50 horses go, and I think that that's important And that's the advice that I would give to any young rider, exactly the same as what Andrew said. It's cliche, you know, work hard, have a goal, go for the goal, you know, focus and everything. All of that is, yes, of course you have to do all of that and more. But the more would be like watch more, be more interested in, you know, what your horse eats, what your horse, when the vet comes, when the blacksmith comes, you know, all of these things that the youth of today has absolutely no idea what is going on. All they do is they come to the ring, they get on the horse, they listen to their teacher sometimes, they do their round, they get off, and then they're off and about. That will not get them here on Saturday or to a championship or anything like that. So I think that's my advice, is would be to pay more attention and be more interested in everything that goes on in the stable, because it's all these little pieces that make that you have sometimes, some days, the success. And it's not just coming, today it's not enough to ride well anymore. You have to, you know, do a lot of other things, other facets of the sport that are really, because if you're not doing it, someone is. One of your competitors is there, doing one more hour, an extra hour, interested in what the vet is doing, why, how we get this horse better, how do we get him more comfort in his shoes, how do we change his bridle. You know, you can go on and on with all the things that you can do to make it work. And that's what I see in the kids of today that are really not interested. Of course, there's always the exception to the rule. It's not all of them. You always see one or the other that are there, but in general, it's, you know, it's not great.
So as we welcome our previous speakers back on stage to join Rodrigo, could I please get a round of applause for Rodrigo Pessoa? So if you guys would like to... And is Kathy there? Is Kathy joining us? Oh, she's coming, yeah. So I believe there is a microphone at the back of the room. I have loads of questions, and when you get speakers like this in front of you, I have so many questions, and I've tried to keep to time as much as possible. I know we started a bit late, so we're running a bit later than I had envisaged. Does anybody in the room have a question that they would like to ask any of the speakers? If we could get a microphone over here, please. And if anyone has a question, if you wouldn't mind just waiting for the microphone so that everybody can hear the question properly in the room and also on the recording.
Hi. My question is for Andrew and Rodrigo. Do you think there is a market for new horses here in the United States? I'm telling like a seller person. Do you think there is a market for new horses here in the United States? Of which age of horse do you think is good to bring here to sell?
In our experience, particularly if you're going to come to a place like Wellington, the market definitely more leans towards 8 and upwards. We also find once a horse hits about, I don't like to put a number on it because there's always exceptions. But once a horse hits 12, 13, in general the value will start to go back down again. However, if you think you have Rodrigo's next Olympic horse or my next Olympic horse, we'll buy them at whatever age, 4, 5, 6-year-old, as soon as they start to show promise. And if we really think a lot of them, I know me and probably Rodrigo, we will bring them here so that we're a little more in part and involved in their production all the way up. But I'd say to answer your question, I think 8 and up is the ideal.
Yeah, I agree. And also, the cost of developing horses here in America is so much bigger than in Europe. you want the horse to come here and be able to compete and sell and get going, because you can't, you know, hang around with the horses here for a long time, because the cost taking the horses to shows and stuff is so much greater than doing it in Europe. So I think that people tend to buy horses a little bit older that they can, you know, sell immediately and compete immediately, and, you know, try to recoup a little bit of their investment because of the cost here is so high.
But do you think this is not a good idea to bring new horses for here because it's expensive, or because it doesn't have clients for new horses, or
No.
the both?
Well, a little bit of both. If you have the possibility to like carry these horses here and have the time with them, and if you have the money to do it, yeah, you can do it, but it's very expensive. You know, to develop a horse here is very expensive. To jump like tiny jumps, and right, and to, you know, go slow and not burn the horse, go against the clock to try to get the little prize money there. It costs a lot. So I think that it's much a problem of cost here than the will of bringing young horses. And now we have young horses classes. There are not so many in those classes because of that. It's just a question of cost.
Yes, I understood. But if you have a really good 5 years old, they will pay here more than in Europe or in another part of the...
Maybe. If you're good, you can sell it over there. You can sell it anywhere. If it's really good, if it goes in the ring and it shows well, somebody will see it, because there's scouts everywhere that are looking, whether it's in Europe, in any show, or here. Someone will see it, and your phone will ring. If it's good, or if it's above average, it doesn't matter. Then you can just bring it and it's going to be okay. But if it's like a normal horse, then you better leave it over there, because it's easier to let him progress, cheaper.
I have an add-on to that. The world has become a smaller place. So if you have a 5-year-old that is good enough, you can jump it right there in that ring, or you can jump it in the, you know, most remote part of Eastern Europe. I'm probably going to see it, or he's probably going to see it within the next 24 hours. So don't worry, wherever it is, we'll find it. So I would say if it suits you personally to bring it here, yes, you can produce a horse quite well here. And they have developed some very, very good young horse incentives and young horse classes here. And there's some fantastic sponsors here that really support it quite a lot. And we're very happy to have those. But as far as your investment, I would say, yeah, we'll find it wherever it is.
Anybody else with a question? This lady down here.
Yes, for the doctor.
And sorry, if everyone could just hold the mic a little bit closer. Perfect. Thank
you.
you.
For the doctor, do you have in vitro fertilization like in cattle, in horses? In vitro, IVF fertilization like in cattle with the horses? Like you
For the IVF and horses, but that's back to ICSI, what you were discussing earlier. But.
So there is actually a difference. So there's two methods in horses. There's ICSI, where the sperm is injected. There actually is, and it's being developed, the IVF, where actually the sperm and the egg are married together. Like in humans. Humans also do ICSI as well, but true IVF is being researched heavily right now. And they are trying to figure out what makes that work. But typically, in most of the early stuff that's been done, it's not done well. The only way that they've been able to successfully create good embryos prior to figuring out this IVF thing is through the ICSI version. Okay. So, but there is, University of Pennsylvania has done some of it, Texas A&M, and there are some other labs that are still very active working on figuring that out. It sounds like a better idea, and it works well if the semen, there's a lot of factors that go into it, and it's a very early science right now, so we don't know what the answer is, but they're able to do it that way. It's just not as reliable as doing the ICSI itself.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have 2 questions back on this side. So this lady had her hand up first. Yeah.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for the great panel. I'm just questioning about the clones. Like, I think I was reading a few months ago about, I think in eventing, and I could be wrong, but I read that now some clones or some champions are getting cloned, and and it seems like it makes it a bit less interesting. But do you see that as a threat, or how common it is? Like, we don't hear so much about it, but I was concerned if you can tell us more about clones in the horse sport.
I can't hear the questions very clearly from where this speaker is.
Yeah, so the question was in terms of your thoughts on the clones. Do you see it as a threat? Like recently, I think what you're referring to is the Chile Morning clones. William Fox Pitt's former successful 5-star horse. There were clones had succeeded, I think it was last season, in the UK. Full clones of Chile Morning that have come to a high level. And it was to get your thoughts on if you see the cloning as a threat. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Oh, as a threat. A threat to what, though? There's not as, so Polo World is a whole different level with the clones. We don't have quite as many in the sport horses, and most of them, it feels a little sentimental for most people that they're producing them, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think the jury's still out on that, and it's a personal decision on that. So, I mean, as a whole, they exist, they're there, it's fascinating. If you've lost one of these horses and you've gotten a clone, it's actually quite amazing, like, 'cause they're back, but...
So I guess it's legal everywhere in USA as well, right? Is it? I wasn't sure if it was.
There are.
Okay.
There are some here.
I have a bit of an anecdote about that. Many years ago, there's a very good stallion named Calvaro, and his rider's name was Willie Melliger. And they said they wanted to clone Calvaro, but they said they're going to have to clone Willie Melliger as well to ride him because no one else could ride him. And in my personal experience in this sport, they are using clones for breeding. So where a stallion gets too old to cover anymore or loses his fertility, they will clone the stallion but just use him for breeding. But I have not seen a huge success in using clones in competition. They don't turn out the same way.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. My question is about your thoughts, and I think this is for the panel as a whole, on the future with genetic research. So, I mean, I'm a bloodline fanatic and looking at all the statistics and so forth, but I'm also looking at my horses and the inbreeding coefficients and the different risks that are showing up. So what are you doing now? How seriously, if at all, are you looking at those beyond warm blood fragile foal syndrome and some of the real obvious ones? But what are you looking at now, and what do you see in the future?
Well, I'm going to lead off on this, and then maybe you might be able to speak a little more. I'm going to take a very rudimentary look at it, and from having produced and worked with a number of horses, I don't like to say inbred, but where they might have the same sire on both sides, we have found that there's a number of genetic disorders and a lot of allergies. They tend to not hold up to a higher level of stress and training and competition. The performance can be exceptional for short periods of time. But what we found is a lot of OCD chips, a lot of soundness issues that can be transferred down. And now we're even starting to see a number of stallions where the direct line were not as good as maybe the dam line. So Lux Z, for example, the direct Lux Zs were not very good, and they weren't very nice, and they had a lot of joint issues and some soundness issues. But actually, when you cross Lux Z with the mare and it was in the dam line and then she had a foal, a lot of those problems went away. Where we actually found where you really only wanted Lux, I'm using Lux Z, his owner's probably going to shoot me after this, but I'm using Lux Z as an example because to me it was quite clear. A lot of those disorders actually went away in the second generation from the mare. And even some of the stallions, the second generation stallions, a lot of them went away again. So in my personal opinion, from the very basic biology, I was always taught hybrid vigor is a good thing, and it's the same in cows, it's the same in horses, that a good wide range and a good cross in genetic is a smart idea. However, you will come across some horses where it's there, and they're doing fine too. There's exceptions to every rule, but that's my personal opinion. Do you, Rodrigo, maybe you might?
I don't know if there's enough science to get down to that level, but just like everything else, it's information and a tool you can use to make smart decisions. And so having that data is useful. Do you have to live by it? Not necessarily. You can follow your own gut on certain things. But it is helpful to know a lot of these statistics. I mean, I don't think the horses will ever get to the level that the cattle are at, because that's a whole different ballgame, but it's a production system. We don't ever want to achieve that level of a situation. So we like the variation within the horses in the sport. So, and you do bring up the inbreeding coefficient. It is important to pay attention to that, because in certain gene pools that shrink too much, you will have more issues. And it's hard to breed out of those, and it takes a lot of thought planning, and in particular, like the Frisians, they have to be very careful how they breed because they've gotten such a narrow gene pool.
I just have one other question that I want to touch on with Rodrigo, because it was something that you mentioned yesterday that really got my interest when I was asking you where your European base is at the moment. And you said it was Deauville, and you talked about the advantages of being based in Deauville. Could you briefly just touch on that and your thoughts of that as a location and utilizing the natural environment?
So for the people that don't know, I lived, before I moved to the US in 2016, I lived in Belgium for 30 years. Because that's where we were based geographically to travel. That was really the best place for us to be in. And when I moved here, I sold the farm that we had in Belgium. And when we go back now, the last couple of years, we went back to Belgium because that's what we knew, and we usually go to Stefex. But last year, to try to prepare for the Olympic Games, I thought I would go to Deauville because, for a couple of reasons. First, that we had a friend that had a very nice farm there. It's a very nice place to be. There's, good food, and the environment is very nice. But mostly, we go and ride the horses on the beach every day, and it's only 2 minutes away from the farm. And so we do a lot on the beach. Walk, trot, canter, walk in the water, all the way belly high, walk the horses for their legs. It's, cold water, salt water. It was very good. And, that beach air my main horse has some respiratory issues, so we want always to keep him in the best not climate, but the best environment possible. And there was not better environment than to be on the coast. And I think that for the fitness of the horses, for the mind of the horses, that is just incredible, because it's just outside. The air is so pure, so fresh. It's much better than being in an arena and doing laps. And you can get a horse fit there. You can. Most of the people do, but it's much easier to do when you have like 5 kilometers of perfect footing right in front of you and fresh air and turn around, walk in the water a little bit and come back. And for the horse's mind, I think that was really made a difference. And so we're going back there this year.
And I just thought it was an interesting insight worth sharing because, especially when we come over from Ireland or Europe and you're going around to the different farms and facilities here, it's phenomenal. Like it's dreamlike properties. But it was a reminder of sometimes what's best is natural and simple. And while everyone doesn't have a beach 2 kilometers away, there are lots of people that are going to listen to this talk or watch the recording that do have some of those natural resources at their disposal. And it was to hear someone that you're based in a phenomenal property here, you have great depth of experience, but to hear you talk about that with such importance to me was interesting, and that's why I wanted to bring it up before we
But not
finish.
also like the beach, but like trail rides, woods, anything, fields, anything that you can go to, leave your property, leave your little perimeter, just go out with the horses safely. If you're safe, go with someone else, but go out. For the mind of the horse, there's nothing like it. And there's also nothing like just turning in circles in a ring. That's terrible for their mind. Go out as much as you can. So that's why we chose the ocean, because it has all those benefits. But if you don't have the ocean, anything out of your perimeter, get out of your comfort zone for the horse to see, keep the horse interested in life. I think that's very important to afterwards have a good performance.
So I'm very conscious of the time and the team that I'm holding up here because I've run over. So I just want to say one big thank you to the panel that have joined, to Keyflow Feeds USA for sponsoring this event, to the Wellington International team for your support in the lead up to this, and the professionalism that you have shown since this idea was floated to you, and your support has been fantastic. To Lisa Laurie for your support and the magic phone calls that must have been made behind the scenes to make this a reality. It's very, very much appreciated, and a big thank you to all of you guys for supporting as well. Can we get a round of applause for all our contributors? I'm not sure how quickly we're going to be kicked out of the room, but I do hope you get a few minutes to even chat amongst yourselves, or if there's a burning question that you didn't get to ask, to try and corner the guys before they get out the door. So thank you all very much.